This program is made possible by a grant from the University City Committee for Access and Local Origination Programming from a fund established in cooperation with AT&T Cablevision.
Once upon a time, there was a magical place in St. Louis known as Gaslight Square. It was a place for joy, for music, for youth. And many of us who were young enjoyed our days there, and our nights especially, like no time we've ever had. Now it's time to look again at Gaslight Square, a landmark forgotten.
St. Louis grew up on the banks of the Mississippi River and was a stopping place for travelers headed west. It was a city with a rich musical heritage and had hosted a World's Fair in 1904 that captivated the imagination of visitors for years. By the 1950s, America, the world's supreme superpower, would now find itself caught in a new conflict of radical social change. For along with the emergence of the Cold War, the Korean conflict, and the unconstitutional behavior of the House Un-American Activities Committee, the United States was now confronting a questioning of its traditional majority values in art, literature, and political self-expression. St. Louis had a promising future with endless possibilities, a population of 800,000, and it was the 9th largest city in the United States. But the American landscape was a simmering cauldron, slowly boiling over in a new renaissance of a quiet social rebellion. St. Louis was soon to support and help construct this important alternative American scene. At a time before orbiting satellites, the internet, and cell phones, there was a cultural movement of social and political reform beginning in America. It was an era of intellectualism, which began in New York's Greenwich Village and quickly swept across the nation. Writers like Jack Kerouac and Allen Ginsberg propelled this undercurrent of social rebellion. These liberal youths dared to be different and rejected the status quo. They celebrated their clandestine differences and became known as beatniks. This new way of life and idealism began a new era known as the Beat Generation. The frontline ammunition of this proactive subterranean beatnik revolution was poetry, political satire, music, and the painters' galleries. St. Louis was soon to be a participant with some of the most influential leaders of this beat generation. On a tiny block of Olive Boulevard, an unusual phenomenon was about to take place. It would ultimately become known as Gaslight Square, an entertainment district that would rival the French Quarter in New Orleans and was known throughout Europe and beyond. Like New York's Greenwich Village, Gaslight Square supported and helped construct this important alternative American scene. It was uniquely St. Louis. The establishments were fashioned after the riverboat theme and the Gaslight era. Lined with over 100 period gaslights, it became a cultural oasis for art, entertainment, restaurants, and after-hour coffeehouse discussions that are still remembered in the new millennium. Air, train, and car travelers going coast to coast would make that deliberate stop in St. Louis to witness Gaslight Square, to see and hear the greats, Lenny Bruce, the Smothers Brothers, Phyllis Diller, and Barbra Streisand. And they would experience the internationally known theaters, nightclubs, jazz clubs, and a 5-star restaurant that once opened their doors to a waiting world. Unfortunately, time is unforgiving, and today Gaslight Square is just another area of rundown, abandoned buildings that resembles a ghost town more than an entertainment mecca. Passers-by never stop to notice what once long ago stood proudly. But if you listen closely to the wind, you might hear the ghosts that keep haunting, the sounds, the life, and the music that was once Gaslight Square. transformation of this once thriving cultural area from its sophisticated glittering moments to a barren cityscape is a loss that is still questioned. Was it caused by a general sense of fundamentalist theory that having fun, perhaps too much fun, was not to be allowed or tolerated? Where were the politicians, the mayor, the police chief, and the aldermen? And why didn't the citizens of St. Louis treasure and protect this once astonishing place, Gaslight Square? What was the driving force that made this Midwestern city create an entertainment district with no limitations on ideals or speech, and what made it flourish? Who were the forward thinkers that dared this new consciousness?
I think 1951 or 2 that I got the inspiration about the bar. And the place was always interesting to me when I was a kid. We used to go down there and look in the antique shops. You know, I love buying antiques. And I was sort of like a junior communist in those days.
We called it Bedbug Row, the area there, because there were antique shops there, and there was this cheap hotel. It was famous for one of the houses there was a brothel that allegedly Babe Ruth was very interested in, not as an owner, just as a customer.
It was like a little village to me. Like, well, there were actual people who had apartments that lived in Gaslight Square.
Well, I came up to the Cardinals in 1954, and during the half of the season, and I was befriended by Harvey Haddix, and we lived at the George Washington Hotel, and he said, why don't we stop at this Alex Bayou's place on the way? And so we did, and so we did that a couple times. And then in 1957, this Alex Bayou, who is then Smokey Joe, turned it into a bar and restaurant. And in 57, he asked me if I would change my name from Jersey Joe to Smokey Joe, and I'll give you all your meals half price and rent at a real reasonable price. And so that's how I lived there with Don Blasingame.
Or the era was just right in the mid-50s and the early 50s. The beat poets in San Francisco were exerting quite an influence.
And they were all against the kind of conformity that went with the Eisenhower years.
Gaslight was a kind of a place where this is where the intellectuals hung out.
I was going out with a young man who took me to his flat, and he showed me his valued collection of Neurotica magazines. He had about 5 issues, and he just thought it was the hippest thing in the world. And a few weeks later, I'm sitting in Washington Square Park, and I meet this very handsome young man, and it turns out he's the editor and publisher of Neurotica magazine. And I say to myself, wait till Shepard gets back to town and I can tell him I've met the editor of Neurotica. Well, 2 days after that, Jay said to me, you know, I think we should see each other quite often, like every night. So in a way, he spoiled the suspense of waiting for him to call. And then he proposed to me. And so by the time poor Shepard got back to town, I was engaged to marry the editor of Neurotica magazine. And he was just about the hippest thing in New York City. He really was. It started off in St. Louis. And it was a literary magazine, and they published a lot of poetry, but it had a psychoanalytic angle to it. The idea was investigating all these areas of art and culture from the point of view of with Freudian insights.
Like, for instance, I was a young communist in the sense, you know, I wanted to be a communist because, mainly because I was rebelling against my father, because, you know, it was trendy. You know, it was kind of interesting to be a communist because people would talk about you. But I didn't know any communists.
Jay practically invented the Beat Generation.
Well, yeah, well, it was a bunch of artists that actually participated in developing Gaslight Square, gave it its intellectual feel.
Everybody who went in business there for the first couple of years went in business with a very idealistic motivation.
They all sort of saw that something was happening there, and they wanted to be a part of it.
I used to be a partner with Sammy Gardner, and we had a place on Del Mar, and we called it the Tiger's Den. We used to have people stand on the walk. We were doing so much business. We were packed jammed every night. We had no tables and people waiting to get in, and all of a sudden it dropped off. And I said to Sammy, what happened? Where did all of our customers go? I said, let's get in the car and go see what's going on in Gaslight Square. So we went down to Gaslight Square, and there were all our customers walking up and down the street. I said, here's where they are. They're out here every night. It's like New Year's Eve down here, and we're sitting out there all by ourselves. We've got to do something. We've got to move down here.
But I would have time in the early days to get out to Gaslight Square and have a drink at each place. There were only 3 or 4 at that time.
All reporters want to have a bar. I think it's maybe all men want to have a bar. It's secret ambition, you know.
It's time we had a bar where we could get a good martini.
Jay tended to attract people like Allen Ginsberg and other poets who came in from the West Coast.
For instance, Jack Kerouac sent Jay the original manuscript of On the Road and wanted Jay to publish it, and Gershon Legman wouldn't let him do it. And I'm so pissed off because, I mean, Jay is associated with the Beats, but if he had published that, he would have been one of the great heroes of the Beat generation. He did publish a poem called Pull My Daisy by Allen Ginsberg that first appeared in Erotica magazine, and then they made a wonderful film called Pull My Daisy about the Beats. So anyway, we were part of that.
Well, success of Mutro's Gaslight there, and Golden Eagle, Jimmy Masucci's place, it was beginning to take an aura of success. And since we had to move someplace, we thought that moving the Crystal Palace to this area would be the smartest move. As it turned out, it was.
And it was Landesman who finally came up with, why don't we, all these gas lights up and down the street, why don't we call it Gaslight Square? And that's what it got named, which was just the right name, because that's what Landesman was good at. Yeah.
And the people that worked at these places were all marginal. They were marginal. They were on the edge. Everybody was kind of on the edge, and when you stayed up all night.
When Dick Mutro opened the Gaslight Bar originally, he opened it as a place for his friends to stop off and have a drink on the way home from downtown. And that's basically what it was for a number of years.
We were fortunate in I guess it must have been about 54, to get a bartender named Jack O'Neill. And O'Neill was the most famous bartender in the whole of St. Louis. I mean, can you imagine an anthropology professor giving up teaching to become a bartender? But I mean, he was such an erudite person, he could talk on any subject under the sun, any subject.
And Jack O'Neill came on the scene. He made the most fabulous martini. Jack would know what they wanted to drink, would talk to them about their problems in life, and try to discourage them as much as possible from having a good time. But the end product was they had a good time, they had a friend.
He had been at the Crystal Palace, and that was very successful. And one day he called me and he said, can you have lunch with me at Meat Arts? And I said, sure. I couldn't figure out why. And we went to Meat Arts, and this guy is like, I tell you what, imagine Churchill and the fat part of Laurel and Hardy. Big, fat person. Very, very intellectual. He had taught anthropology at Washington U. But he decided to be a bartender, more money. And he said, I'd like to work at the Gaslight. And I said, what happened? He said, well, I just don't want to be there. Well, he had been fired, obviously. But anyway, I think that the reason the Crystal Palace wanted to get rid of him was because he was becoming more famous than the Landesmans. You know, the Landesmans, you know, you get a little jealous, like they're coming there to see the bartender, not them, you know. And I didn't mind that, because I didn't want anything to do with the bar if I could help it. Well, he came in there, and instantly the Gaslight just quadrupled, and everybody came there because he had this wonderful knack of insulting everybody. I mean, he had this thing that he was so intellectual, you know, that he overpowered everybody. He was, I would say he was the closest thing to a Nazi that St. Louis ever produced. So he had a few of the right-wing friends sitting there just applauding him. And he would insult Jews, and the Jews would come in and just be thrilled that he had picked them out. You know, I mean, I couldn't understand it. How could he do that? But he was bigger than life.
I was there when the tornado struck, February 10th at 2:04 in the morning. In fact, the address that we were at was Olive at Boyle, and the worst area that was hit was Olive at Boyle. And I had just come in early that evening, and my roommate, Don Blassingame, he was out shooting quail in Corinth, Mississippi, and another friend of mine, Teddy Glenn, who was a chef, was there, and he had asked me a question about the Bible. And he was Catholic and I was Protestant, and I was determined to find the answer. I had just become a Shriner, and I had my Shriner's Bible there, and I was determined to find the answer. And as time went on, before you know it, 2 o'clock, 2:04, the tornado came through. We had a skylight in our apartment, and the tornado went through our skylight, and my neighbor next door, it went through the back of his bedroom and knocked the back of the wall of the bedroom on top of our cars. And I thought it was a windstorm, and it wasn't. It was a tornado, and the whole stairs all the way up was full of rock and so on. Gas was leaking. First thing you know what we did? We lit candles. Yeah.
But everybody went down to see what the storm did to the area of Boyle and Olive, and they all stayed to drink. So.
And this was the beginning of the end, you might say, because all these people came down to view this terrible tornado wreckage. They didn't come down there for the bar, they just wanted to see. Then so many of them said, gosh, it's an interesting little place. I think I'll open a place down there. And I think it was within 3 years, it went from 4 liquor licenses, or maybe it was 3 liquor licenses, up to 25 or so. And then it was pandemonium. I mean, you had crowds coming down there. I mean, it was like Times Square, and it was really very unpleasant.
After the tornado, what you got was a lot of quick money came in. Insurance money came in to help fix up some of the places. I mean, necessary money. And then some of the beer companies got involved. They said, oh, hey, look, a lot of people here. We're going to be spending money to redecorate these saloons, and we have entertainment, and let's do something with the neighborhood. And, they kind of chartered it up a little bit and put in a lot of money. And I think it lost some of its spontaneity right then and there.
We'd only been in the business, what, 3 years? 2 years? We were opening for Jackie and Roy, and they came to see Jackie and Roy, and we did a very drunk show, late show, and Jay Management just said,
for chiropractors, in fact, there was a bunch of chiropractors, and I was so pissed at my brother because he was saying dirty things. I said, you say one more bad word, and I'm off the stage, and he said something, rah, 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 and the chiropractors go, yay! And he said, he's bombing out, so to get laughs, all he said was, chiropractic, yay! They were just drunk, everybody was just loaded. And Jay, we had no idea who this person was. He was so over the top. And he was right on this level to communicate with my brother that evening. They negotiated this deal.
So it worked out. Crystal Palace.
Yeah.
I went up to see them, and I offered them a deal without really, I just saw their one act, and I offered them a deal. I think it was $500 for the two of them to come down for a week. And Tom says to his brother, I got this sucker down from St. Louis. He offered us $500. He'd never gotten that much before. And the ending to the story is very good, because the last time they were at the Crystal Palace, they got $10,000 for 3 days.
We did these shows, which included people like Barbra Streisand and Elaine May and Mike Nichols and Lenny Bruce. cabaret shows in order to pay for what we considered the serious theater. In our serious theater, we did Endgame by Beckett and Waiting for Godot and a lot of Shaw, stuff like that, which didn't cost us a lot of money and didn't pay for itself. But then we would have Phyllis Diller and the Smothers Brothers and people like that, which filled the house.
Jay Landesman and I guess Fred and the whole family, what they were misplaced. They should not have been in St. Louis because they really wanted to be in New York. And so what they did, though, they did something that was unique, because in St. Louis, the Crystal Palace was like, you know, known all over, even over, you know, in New York, you knew where the Crystal Palace was, because all these New York comedians and people went there. Then they wrote a thing called The Nervous Set, which was an original play by Jay and Fran. She wrote the music. And it was a tremendous success. It was like, it went on for like a year or so. And they decided they'd take it up to New York.
Jay and Fran, his wife, Fran wrote lyrics for Tommy Wolfe's music for the original Nervous Set, which first premiered in Gaslight Square. And you talk about passing of generations. When the Nervous Set went to Broadway, it was the first job for a young actor named Larry Hagman, who later went on to be a star in Dallas many years later. And he was also Mary Martin's son.
We had a piano player in those days who was sort of like what they call a musical director now, but we didn't use that term, Tommy Wolfe. And I mean, he got me started. Whatever I am now, I really owe to Tommy Wolfe, because he was the piano player in our first little bar, and I would sit next to him, and we'd just go over a lot of old songs that we liked. And one day I thought of this song title, which was Spring Can Really Hang You Up the Most. And I said, wouldn't that make a funny song title, Tommy? And he said, yeah, why don't you write it? So I wrote that lyric.
And all the guys who owned the places were very eccentric. And of course, what made them eccentric is because they didn't think they were eccentric. And these were eccentric guys who used to drink at each other's places and enjoy themselves. They were very, very much like me, but they fought against it.
And Marty, of course, he had, you never knew who you were going to see in Marty's, because all the waiters were singers. You know, a guy would wait on your table, then he'd go over, all of a sudden he's up there singing, you know. And Marty was like the ringleader.
Come by for a drink. We're having a game wherever I go. I'm glad that I came.
There was the wonderful Marty Bronson's place where people broke into operatic arias after they served you or while they were serving you.
Actually, the story goes that I had to buy a place to get a job. They all hung out in my place. The only, and of the name performers, the only one that didn't come into my place was Barbra Streisand. But Tom and Dick Smothers used to hang out in there. Professor Corey hung out in there. All of the big names who played the Crystal Palace came down. About every other Friday, every musician in the city, around 1 o'clock in the morning, would bring their instruments and come into my place, and I'd turn the lights up full, lock the doors, and we'd have a jam session till 4 or 5 in the morning.
It was an enjoyable place that things happened. Celebrities came in town. Sinatra and his group, Dean Martin, were in St. Louis at the Keel Auditorium on I believe it was a Teamsters benefit. At behind stage, they were talking and going to Gaslight Square, and I think it was a Crystal Palace they were going to. It was Jay Landsman's place, which is a popular spot. Then he had Marty's. He had fine dining. Jack Carl's 2-cent plane, where they made the best pastrami ever.
Up above the Crystal Palace, we had our little apartments.
They were little apartments, yeah, that's right. And they were all furnished with old period pieces, because they were in the antique business too, you know. And that shag carpeting, and Gypsy Rose Lee had just vacated my room, or my apartment, and we knew this because there were little doggy bones with very sharp edges that were in the shag carpeting, and I picked them up every once in a while.
Doggy bones?
Well, she had poodles with her. Oh, poodles. So she gave them bones. They're like a piece of roast beef, I don't know. They were just bones. And you were walking barefoot. But it was just, she was an icon. You know, I said, it's okay. It's okay.
I consider very, very fortunate and privileged to be at a time and a place when I could, on a daily basis, meet with fascinating New York-based jazz, black artists, people of this sort that had an entirely different perspective on the world than mine, coming from a South St. Louis upbringing.
There was a place called the Dark Side. That's where the Quartet Très Bien performed. They were there every night, and they had guest people in there too.
There were so many that were right around me in Gaslight that on my break I could run next door to the Dark Side and see the Quartet Très Bien, who are landmarks, as you know, from here.
They had so many clubs to go to, plus so many different types of music. And it was a lot of festivity going on. It seemed like carnival every night, you know. And of course, musicians enjoy that. The people, they had a different aura about them, and it was very enjoyable, you know. We met a lot of people. The people were really nice, very responsive to the music. And we also got a big break on getting a recording, a couple of recordings out of Gaslight Square.
It's the first time I ever heard Miles Davis with Sketches of Spain. Someone laid it on me. Oh my God. And hearing different music and I'm Forever Blowing Bubbles. Who were they?
I'm Forever. Oh, Jackie and Roy.
Jackie and Roy. First time I'd ever altered my consciousness. You know, that was the first time I'd run into, smoked a joint was in St. Louis, and all of a sudden music sounded different. And everything was
statutes of limitations.
Yeah.
Memories you can't get arrested for.
Memories you can't get arrested for. But it was a wonderfully free, open place.
Gaslight Square was one of the most wonderful things that could have ever happened in the city of St. Louis. It probably will never take place again. It was a place where people from all walks of life met together, enjoyed music together, enjoyed life together. Because this was in the 60s. So I was really just getting started, you know, to really getting to some of the better clubs, you know, during that time. I worked at the Dark Side and the Black Horse and Spider Burke's The Other Side.
Well, Gaslight Square, as far as performing, was sort of a unique venue because of the fact that there were so many other different clubs in the area. It helped me to learn how to read crowds. You'd have a different age group. Sometimes you'd have to, you know what to play, what not to play, when, you know, what volumes, and it was a good learning experience. And I often say that a lot of these groups should go through that, you know, go through an experience like that, working clubs such as we had down at Gaslight. One guy I was most impressed with was Gene Krupa. He happened to come in. I think he was coming in Crystal Palace. And so I got to meet Gene. My being a drummer, you know, I was really excited about that. And then the Smothers Brothers, they were appearing there over at Crystal Palace quite a bit. We used to go over and see Barbra Streisand. I can't really remember seeing her perform, but I remember running into her over there a couple times. Smothers Brothers, we used to love to go over and catch them, you know, on our breaks.
It was never a dull moment, I'll tell you that.
Yes, I hate to see hate to see that evening sun go down because the man I love now gone and left this town.
It was a magical time that catered to everyone, and everyone loved everyone. You didn't meet strangers when you walked the streets in Gaslight Square. We all felt like we were bound together.
No, well, I've got St. Louis blues, blue as I can be. You know what? I got the St. Louis blues, blue as I can be. Oh yes, that man's got a heart like a rock cast in the sea. You guys got it?
I remember Jay was going to drop some acid with Timothy Leary or Richard Alpert so we could. And I keep reading this. I see him the following year. I said, to change you at all? I expected. They said if you drop this acid, you come back. You see God, and you come back with a different viewpoint in life. And this one guy said that he didn't like this guy. It's always around. I said, did he change? No, he's the same old asshole. Same thing. Just he saw God and he didn't change at all. Came back.
There was a certain esprit de corps, camaraderie amongst the performers. It was just fun to be there, and I think that was true amongst the customers and the performers and the performers, and it was just a great time.
I think there were 5 Dixieland bands working at one time in Gaslight.
Yeah.
I counted at one point. Yeah. We were the only ragtime guys.
That's right.
We were playing the entertainer before anybody knew what it was.
Lenny Bruce came through there early.
It was Lenny Bruce that said, yeah, he looked at his opening line was, came out, he looked at the place and he says, looks like a church that's gone bad. And that was quoted many a time after that.
So we picked Lenny up at the airport, and on the way back he said, you know, people say that your club is so special, but the motivation for working is bread. And, you know, it's just like any other club as far as I'm concerned. And after he was there a week or two, he said, you know, I think there really is something special about the Palace. Yes, yes, he ate his words.
At one time, Jay was telling me about these, Lenny Bruce was there, and these people, I think they were either Girl Scout leaders or nuns, or something of this nature. Someone he did not want in that room.
But the district attorney was walking into the Crystal Palace bar with his 2 teenage daughters, and Jay luckily caught him at the door and said, I don't think you're going to like this show. We've got the Smothers Brothers coming next week. Bring your daughters to see that. Because just before that, one of the clubs in Chicago had been busted. Not only was Lenny taken down at the police station, but the guy who owned the club was taken down at the police station. And ultimately, I mean, he was a friend. I mean, he used to come and lie on our bed and watch television with us. And we couldn't book him anymore because we were too scared of getting busted.
Going up to the room where Lenny was staying and sitting there and talking to him, we were both originally from Brooklyn, so we got along pretty well. And he was eating green Jell-O with a fork. That was his dinner before he went on. Now, I'm sure there were some controlled substances too, but that wasn't my job. I was not a crime reporter. I was writing feature stories.
He was funny throughout the show. I mean, he had a lot of friends there. But his show became, we had him about 2 or 3 times. We had him on the way up, and we had him on the way down. And that was interesting to see him, the difference in his act. Because when he first came there, he was interested in what he referred to as, hey man, I'm only in this for the bread. Well, when he came back after he had gotten into all that trouble, he realized that he wasn't only interested in it for the bread. It was something else. It was the Gaslight Square meant something to him because he meant people who were not square, and not the ordinary people who were running clubs.
He was one of those people that Jay really, you have to give Jay a lot of credit for, that, you know, he needed the work. He took a chance with him, things of that sort. He knew he'd be, let's say, bucking the authorities a little bit, but felt it was still legitimate theater.
But if people would come into the club, if they were in town, Miles Davis or Dizzy Gillespie or Dick Gregory, and everybody show up at the Palace and play, you know, set in. And I remember, was it Dick Gregory or Dizzy Gillespie who was beating up on me sitting in the
No, Tommy went to this black club, basically a black club, and Dick Gregory was there, and he asked Tommy to come up, and here's this, Tommy's the only white guy there. And he started beating up on him verbally, and the audience.
Hey, white boy, you're gonna. Well, you know, he said, oh, they can't talk either. You know, it just kept.
Pretty soon the audience got on Tommy's side because he was so
on.
helpless. It was pretty good.
Just walked up and played the victim.
Yeah, played the victim. Yeah.
Played the victim.
The only one that didn't take up the Crystal Palace family sort of life was Woody Allen, who was so neurotic. He used to do a show where he hardly got any laughs at all, and after the show he would always call a psychiatrist down in the phone box that was between the ladies' room and the ladies' toilet and the men's toilet. So he would sit there and talk to a psychiatrist. He says, "I'm dying here. Get me out. I got to come home." The psychiatrist evidently wouldn't let him come home. He says, "But I'm dying." He says, I'm not going over at all. But he was going over as the line of down in the basement where these toilets were, was packed full. He got lots of laughs in the toilet line.
When Woody came to work for us, he tried to give us back his check because nobody came to see him. I think it was just about the first gig he ever had, and he was absolutely terrified. And I would go down, and the dressing rooms were in the basement, and I'd go down there and hang out with him in the dressing room before he would go on, and he'd be pacing up and down saying, "Oh, I hope they're going to be nice. Oh, I do hope they were going to be nice." He was so nervous and so terrified. And from the get-go, we thought he was hilarious. We thought he was just brilliant, but people couldn't get it. I mean, he used to say things like, "I tended to put my wife under a pedestal as opposed to on a pedestal." I don't think he's ever been that funny again. He was heaven.
One of the shows were fabulous, or the audiences were terrific, and the most famous line we ever created, "Mom Always Liked You Best," was created on that stage, and it maybe even
recording that album.
Yeah,
but we were doing the show, and one night, Dickie was the role was a great showroom. It was a wonderful showroom for comedians, and he was. I said, get me some good, really put me down. And when the audience starts to turn on my brother, he's doing a great job. They start to boo him a little bit, and he had a role going. And one night, it just happened to be on that stage. He had done a litany of about 7 put downs. You're stupid. You're dumb. You can't do anything right. You're not a man. You
don't deserve to be a brother.
You don't deserve to be a brother. He ran out of gas, and finally he finished, and he looked at me, and I just out of the blue, I said, "Oh, yeah, well, Mom Always Liked You Best." It was like putting the final thing, and the audience went crazy. And it was a very creative place.
There were just some monumental talents that passed through Gaslight Square. You know, and of course, Streisand was one of the more notable. And an interesting sidebar is that Jay Landisman wanted to fire her the first night.
She was getting $250 a week, and there was an option in the contract, which I saw the contract. I know for a fact she was to come back if they exercised the option. She could come back at $500 a week, and nobody gave a damn whether she ever came back or not. I mean, she was so strange and so different. And she wasn't doing any business, you know, there was no business for her.
In those days, we didn't have air conditioning in our houses, or maybe one room would have some air conditioning, but mostly it was just incredibly hot in St. Louis, and Barbara and I used to get on the Olive Street trolley car and go downtown to Scruggs, Vandervert, and Barney and wander around for hours in the air conditioning, and Barbara would try on hats and make wonderful jokes. And she was such great company. I cannot tell you what fun she was to be with. I gather she's changed since then.
She would go to antique stores. She wore like maternity smockings.
She fit perfect.
Collected
She
beaded
dressed
bags.
just like that St. Louis looked.
Yeah, it's beaded little antique bags and stuff. From the very get-go, she was a little leftist.
Well, there were many nice restaurants down there. I know one of our favorites was Mr. D's, which was right next door to us at the Natchez Queen, and they were down in the basement. Well, quite often we would go to have dinner there first because all we had to do was walk up outside and one door next door, and there we were.
The Musical Arts Building restaurant, which was run by Paul Muto, and the Muto family owned the building, and upstairs in that building was the theater. It was the Gateway Theater. People like Jack Murdoch, who died recently, and many others did good amateur and some semi-pro theater there. And in the basement was the Three Fountains restaurant.
Oh yeah, they had a lot of ragtime and a lot of good jazz. And they had restaurants there, the Three Fountains restaurant, the likes of which had never been seen before in St. Louis or any place else for that matter.
And we had the Three Fountains, wonderful, wonderful restaurant. They had gone in there and they tore out the floor and they made the restaurant so you had to go down a big set of stairs to go down into the basement, and it was wonderful, wonderful restaurant. I took Jackie Leonard up there.
Paul and I were partners, and we opened this multi-level restaurant, which was great, you know, like stairway, grand stairway going down. And I came up with these chandeliers that I got from Washington U that had been in the World's Fair building. And my brother winced. You know, he said, "Oh, God, he didn't like that." And so then I started putting green flock wallpaper on it. Oh, he was so upset. He'd go to my mother and he'd say, "Rich is ruining everything." Then I got the Romeo and Juliet window, and then I got the marble statue, and I got that from Hirschfeld. But you know, it was like there was this war between us because I wanted the decor, and he thought people should be very happy with just, you know, the architectural concept of two levels. But anyway, it ended up being very, very successful.
You walked into the building, you came in at ground level, and the bar was there, and there was a balcony. It was on a balcony which looked down into a lower level, and the lower level was the main dining room, filled with chandeliers, and it looked very much like old New Orleans. It was one of the most beautiful restaurants we've ever had in St. Louis, and certainly one of the best.
What a magnificent place that was, and what wonderful food. You know, it was just great.
Working there was hectic, mainly after the Three Fountains opened. That's all we did was work and worry about everything because we had such a big investment there. And it opened with I think for the first year, it was like amazing. You know, it was like far beyond what we ever dreamed of.
Unfortunately, it only lasted a few years.
I remember the night the Musical Arts Building caught on fire. We were playing down there. It was during the week. It was like a Tuesday or Wednesday night, and it was cold. I mean, so cold. It was like 10 degrees below zero that night.
It was a very cold night. The street of Olive Street and Boyle both were sheets of ice from the water. And I had a fairly good crowd that night, but basically the square was deserted because it was an ice storm.
And I remember it was just, the fire was huge. And I used to go to music school there. I used to go take my music lessons there. And I think it had housed like the Three Fountains restaurant or something too. But anyway, I remember the firemen coming in to where we were playing. We were playing butterscotch that night, and their helmets were just loaded with icicles. I mean, that's how cold it was.
We were there the night after it burned down.
But we all had alibis.
Yeah, I remember I was talking to Jack O. I said, "Gee, look at that, Jack." I says, "That looks like a fairyland over there." And Jack says, "Well, hell, it was that before it burned down."
What a great area. And that's trolley, there was tracks right down the center, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Did the trolleys run?
I think they did.
many movie people, writers. Chandler Broussard, the novelist, would hang out there. Nelson Algren would come to town often. And the Route 66 guys were in there a lot because they shot a lot of scenes in and around St. Louis.
I was sitting at the bar with George Maharis, I think, who was there, and Marty Milner. And George Maharis's brother was there, Tom Maharis. And a lot of the long shots, they used to use Tom because George Maharis was not well. I think he had hepatitis, if I remember right, something very, very bad. So they didn't use him they used him as sparingly as they could. And they had put the brother in the long shots.
Yeah, they did some filming. They did some filming in my place, and as a matter of fact, George Maharis came back a little bit later and was a guest on my television show, and my wife and I entertained him for a weekend, and he was a delightful guy.
We've never had as good a time in our careers staying in one place than we did at the Crystal Palace and Gaslight Square. Socially, creatively, and the conversations we had were memorable, and although I have no memory of them, I know I get this great warm feeling.
We have impressions.
Great impressions of the warmth of that exceptional time that everything came together.
The Crystal Palace was a very unique part of theatrical history in this country.
Yeah, well, it was a very sexy place. I feel that it was really the first of the Anything Goes cafes. We should have called it Anything Goes Cafe, because there's a lot of divorces came out of the Crystal Palace, which I'm not particularly proud of, but certainly was a lot of action. Can we put it that way? And use your imagination. But there wasn't a place, I mean, under the piano and back of the ice cooler, oh, everything went on. And a lot of husbands didn't like the place. The girls all seemed to like it. And there was a lot of handsome men around who satisfied the bourgeois existence of many of these people. And I enjoyed it.
When we finished that show, the first time they said, "Anything you like here on this?" I said, "God, I like that Tiffany." And they said, "Yeah, you can have that." And the snood bronze thing I still have. And they said,
Tiffany.
A signed Tiffany, and they treated very, it was like a gift for doing well for them.
Yeah, maybe it had some impact on the Tiffany logo on the Smothers Brothers show, how we felt about the stained glass thing, even though it became a very big rage, you know.
That might have, yeah. We just remembered Crystal Palace, and here we have the Tiffany all over stages for all of our shows. That had something to do with it.
Jay was wonderful and a great friend of mine, and I miss him now. He left, and he said to me, I had the Tigers Den, he said, "Would you come across the street, you know, and run the Crystal Palace for me, because I don't have anybody to run it." I said, "Sure, why not?"
Losing him to London is although I don't know what he would do here in the first place. I don't know what Landisman would do in St. Louis.
We came over here, we came to England with only one telephone number, Peter Cook's, but it was the right one. And we had a great time with Peter Cook and the Fringe people, Alan Bennett. And
Jay was a real raconteur, a host. He enjoyed being out front and meeting people. And Fred, while a wonderful, brilliant gentleman, was not quite that outgoing. But Fred's son, Rocco, has become, you know, a huge success as a Broadway producer.
people are so curious to see this Mel Brooks show. They're selling tickets for $500 now, and a lot of people who know Rocco in school and the Landisman name, they say, "Come on, Rocco, give us some tickets. I gotta think this guy. The guy's wife is dying of cancer. I want to take her to a show, have a few laughs." And he said, "My children," and this, and a lot of excuses. And Rocco just looked at him and says, "Not good enough."
I was there the night the Cardinals won the World Series, and a bunch of nitwits on the street tried to turn over a streetcar.
People were celebrating and dancing in the streets. They almost turned a streetcar over out in front. but everybody was in a jovial mood. I remember they came marching in our place, and we just kind of marched right on out with them. So,
the only good thing about it was I got to sing the national anthem at the opening game of the World Series. So.
That was one of the more exciting times when the Cardinals won.
In fact, I think we were the last band to appear at the old Sportsman's Park, and then we were the first band to appear at Busch Stadium. You know, we played the opening. That was neat. I'd like to play the opening of the new stadium. Hope I'm around long enough to play the opening of the new stadium.
The first few years, nobody ever got out of line. Nobody ever got disorderly. Nobody behaved badly on the street or in the places. And then it came the first summer when there was a big article appeared in an American Airlines magazine. And one Saturday night, I guess there were 20 to 25,000 people walking the sidewalks in Gaslight Square.
The attitude changed. And I think that the attitude of the business owners changed too. They were more interested in making a buck than they were in having a place for their friends to drink.
And that's when the trouble began. And the sidewalk vendors came in, and the spinning paintmeisters, where they, you know, you dab oil on a piece of cardboard, and they put it on a turntable, and it spun and made a pattern, and everybody became an artist. And you know, they just had all kinds of carnival gimmicks, really. And so, quite frankly, that watered down the feeling of well-being and sophistication and the big city ambiance.
I think it was hurt by its own popularity. It got too crowded. When the street is too crowded and people can't get into places, it becomes difficult and people get angry and they can't get served.
If there was a robbery in that area, the Globe Democrat at that time, they'd always run in the headline, robbery near Gaslight Square. And, you know, it got to be a thing, kind of a joke, because we thought anybody gets robbed within 10 blocks a year, he's going to be saluted in the St. Louis Globe Democrat.
The Post-Dispatch and the Globe, which had done a wonderful job promoting the area, you know, articles saying, look at these clever young men and all their interesting little bistros and stuff like that. Then they decided that that's news media, by virtue of what they are, they don't like success.
Gaslight Square closed up because I think of bad media press. There wasn't major crime in Gaslight Square. The major crime, if there was any, was on the outside areas. And if you went outside Gaslight Square and you were looking for trouble, and looking for drugs, or looking for any other thing, you deserve what you got out there. But I think the bad press, that so somebody got robbed, somebody got hurt in a purse snatching that was on the outside area, that's what we had a decoy squad in there. We had the mobile reserve, the canine officers, the 9th District walking officers, the 9th District officers. And we had, at that time, A.J. Cervantes was our mayor, and he was very social.
A.J. Cervantes, he was the mayor of St. Louis, and he came out and we had a meeting of the owners, and he said, I'll tell you what we're going to do, fellas. You've done so much for the city of St. Louis. We've brought so many tourists in here. You're known worldwide. He says, we're going to really take care of you. So we said, well, what are you going to do? Well, he says, first of all, we're going to have lighted parking lots all around the perimeter of Gaslight Square so that nobody is in danger, you know, walking to their car from Gaslight Square. We'll have lighted parking lots with uniformed attendants. And he said, we're going to put a gate at each end of Gaslight Square so that you'll have a closer supervision of the area. And A.J. Cervantes promised me, he made so many promises, I can't tell you how many promises he made. And he walked out of there and we never saw him again.
I don't know what happened to Camelot, as we call Gaslight sometimes.
The demise, we never saw the demise of that. We went on and
back and it's gone.
And we heard it turn into girly places and strip clubs, and it got real sleazy and just disintegrated. But at that time, it was a glorious golden age of that, and it must have been about 5-6 years that it became pretty renowned.
I met a lot of wonderful people there, especially at Smokey Joe's restaurant, baseball fans. Yeah, I missed it, and we had a lot of fun times there. Yeah, it was a great area.
I was the end because I left being O'Connell's Pub, left in 1972. And there was nothing left at that time. A lot of the old woodwork, the paneling, the signs, all of that, even the front windows, the little diamond front windows, all of that was part of it. Yeah, we brought everything with us, including, you know, the great chandeliers that were part of the World's Fair here. And fortunately, Joe Pollock, who was then a friend and customer and is still a friend and customer, was there amongst a lot of other interesting people at the time. He wrote a great article about it. Not necessarily the fact that we were leaving and closing, but that it was, I think he titled it, you know, the last flame in Gaslight Square is diminished. I forget the terminology used, but he used it as a focal point to give this wonderful historical perspective of what once was and is finally now no more.
Quite a few years later, going to St. Louis, I said, I got to go by and see Gaslight Square. And this might have been in the 70s. And I couldn't find it.
It wasn't there.
It's on Olive Street? Is that what it is?
Yeah, Olive.
Olive. So I said, I went back to this major intersection. I said, no, it's this way. And I turned around, came back, and I couldn't find it. And it really...
Was it a cyclone or a
Well, no, it was just...
tornado hit it too?
What I remember, emotionally, that it was all painted this navy gray or blue-gray and blob. It's like someone had spray painted the whole block, and it was nothing there. It was just, it lost color. There was nothing open.
It was totally unique in a sense, but it's one of those things that you couldn't be, I don't think even as genius as a Walt Disney could figure out how to maintain it, you know? Yeah.
The interesting thing is, and I think it's most important to remember, is how many people remember the square lovingly. It's amazing. Even today, all these years later, because it's 40 years since I opened my place down there. I was only 2 at the time. But it's absolutely amazing if people come up and just say what a wonderful time they had there and how enamored they were of it and how they wish it was still there. You know.
To quote-unquote try to duplicate that is trying to duplicate last spring's tulips. Next spring, the tulips are going to be just as beautiful in the sense of the word to the human eye, but they aren't last year's tulips.
And we lost a treasure. Lost a treasure. And I say we, the city of St. Louis and the people, we didn't take care of what we had. And it's today's world too. If you don't take care of it, you're going to lose it.
Today, all that's left of Gaslight Square in St. Louis are a few deserted buildings and fading memories. The tragic deterioration of the district is reflected in St. Louis's declining population and the relocation of major corporations to more desirable cities. Could this amazing phenomenon ever be repeated by the children of St. Louis, who now hang out in malls and watch MTV as their main source of modern culture? Or will they be fortunate enough to witness another amazing rebirth of their city that looks forward to the future without neglecting its past? And will they become the civic entrepreneurs of their time? And the beat still goes on.
Who will live in our house after we've gone? Will they have green plastic instead of a lawn? Who will live in our house after the wars? Will there be mutations that crawl on all fours? Will the shiny robot workers be dreaming strange new dreams? Will the pigeons, big as turkeys, roost on our ancient beams? Who will use our kitchen? What will they cook? Who will sleep in our room, and how will they look? Will they feel our ghosts disturbing their cybernetic years with the echoes of our laughter and the shadows of our tears? Will there still be lovers? Who will sing our songs? Who will live in our house after we've gone?